There's a panic quietly building on Wall Street, and honestly, most people have no clue why. But right now, a hidden financial move happening over in Japan is flashing some pretty urgent warning signals for the US market. And it all kicks off with a number that's, well, it's just hard to even wrap your head around.
Yep, that's $1 trillion. That's the amount of losses that Japan's entire financial system just, poof, made disappear from their books. An amount so huge, it could seriously destabilize, well, everything.
So you gotta be asking, right? How on earth does $1 trillion loss just vanish into thin air? Well, let's get into it, because the answer is this fascinating and, frankly, kind of terrifying inflation playbook that governments always seem to run when their backs are against the wall. And understanding it might just be the key to protecting your own savings. Okay, so first up, this $1 trillion magic trick. Now, this isn't some abstract problem for bankers in Tokyo. No, this is a very real crisis that was brewing just under the surface of the world's third biggest economy. This slide really shows you the brutal reality of the situation. You see, Japanese banks are sitting on mountains of government bonds they bought for, basically 100 cents on the dollar. But because these bonds pay next to zero interest, their actual value on the open market has completely cratered. They're now worth as little as 38 cents. I mean, that's a mind-blowing 62% loss. Now, in a normal world, banks would have to report that massive loss. And doing so would trigger a complete collapse. Kind of like what we saw with Silicon Valley Bank, but on a scale that's hard to even imagine. So instead of facing the music, Japan just changed the rules. Regulators literally just announced that banks and insurance companies, they don't have to report these losses anymore. They can just pretend the bonds are still worth 100 cents. Problem solved, right? And this quote just nails the absurdity of it all. It really is like your house crashing in value, but your mortgage lender just tells you, hey, don't worry about it. On paper, it's still worth what you paid for it. It's nothing more than an accounting gimmick to stop their entire financial system from blowing up right then and there. So you're probably thinking, okay, that's a huge mess for Japan, for sure. But why is it a ticking time bomb for me here in America? Well, the answer lies in this massive, tangled web of finance known as the carry trade. For years, big-time investors have borrowed literally trillions of dollars in Japan, where interest rates are basically zero, and then they've plowed all that cheap money into the US stock market, tech, crypto, you name it. This constant flood of cheap money, and we're talking a jaw-dropping $20 trillion, has been one of the biggest forces pushing up the prices of, well, everything. And look, we've already seen just how fragile this whole setup is. Just last August, Japan nudged its interest rates up by a tiny, tiny fraction. The reaction? It was instant and it was violent. The Nasdaq dropped 10%, Bitcoin plunged 23% in just a matter of days as some of that carry trade money got spooked and rushed back home. That, my friends, was just a little warning shot. And this is the key takeaway right here. That accounting trick in Japan wasn't just some boring policy update. No, it was an act of pure desperation. It was done to stop a sudden cash crunch that would have forced their banks to dump all their U.S. assets to raise money, which would completely unravel that $20 trillion carry trade and trigger a global crisis that would make 2008 look like a warm-up act. But here's the really scary part. Japan isn't some unique case. They're just further down the road. The U.S. is on the exact same trajectory of unsustainable debt. The timing's always a question mark, of course, but we're setting the stage for the very same playbook to be used here. If you need proof, just look at this one number. The U.S. national debt is now over 120% of our entire yearly economic output, and it's climbing by over $1 trillion every single year. You know, when debt gets to a level where it can never, ever be paid back, governments have a very predictable response. And this right here is that playbook. It almost always follows these 6 steps. First, the government borrows even more money. Step 2, the central bank, our Fed, prints new money out of thin air to buy all that new debt. That lets them move to step 3, keep spending money they don't have. The inevitable result? Step 4, inflation. Prices go up because you have way more dollars chasing the same amount of stuff. And that, cleverly, leads to step 5. They get to pay back their old debts with new, devalued, cheaper dollars. And the final move, like we just saw with Japan, is to use accounting tricks to hide the damage from all of us. What this playbook really does is create a massive, massive transfer of wealth. It punishes people who save, and it rewards people who are in debt. So knowing this is coming, the big question is, how do you make sure you end up on the winning side of that transfer? Okay, so this playbook basically divides every asset into two camps. You've got the traps and you've got the winners. The traps are the things that are guaranteed to lose their buying power when inflation hits. Cash is the most obvious one, right? A dollar today will buy you less tomorrow. And long-term bonds, which people think are safe, they get absolutely crushed. The winners, they're real assets, things that can't just be printed into existence by a central bank. So what do we mean by a quality stock in this kind of environment? Well, you're looking for a business that has true pricing power. Think about a company like Apple. If they raise the price of an iPhone by $100, are people going to stop buying it? No way. That's pricing power. These companies also tend to have really strong balance sheets with very little debt, and they are super profitable. A good sign is a gross margin over 60%. And then, of course, there are hard assets. There's a simple reason why gold has preserved people's wealth for literally thousands of years. You can't print more of it. Well, the Fed can create trillions of dollars with a few keyboard strokes, destroying the value of the cash in your wallet. The amount of gold in the world stays relatively stable. It's not about getting rich. It's about having insurance against the very money-printing playbook we've been talking about. So, as we wrap this up, the critical question you really need to ask yourself is this. When you look at your own savings, your own investments, is your portfolio prepared to handle this playbook? Or is it filled with those traps that are almost designed to lose value over time? Japan just showed us the script, page by page. The only question now is whether we're going to be ready for the performance.